Hello and welcome to Literary as Feck with myself, Nicholas O'Shea Khan, and your man over there,
Clive Davis.
I think my Irish accent started to fail at the end there. That's always embarrassing.
You've been away too long.
Evidently. So this week on Literary as Feck, we're talking about two books by Jerome K. Jerome, who is an English writer.
One of the greatest names ever,
yes.
I think.
Yes.
I like the name.
I agree.
Jerome K. Jerome. It's something very symmetrical and satisfying, and everything about it is great.
And I should have written down when these books were written, but I didn't. Three Men in a Boat. It's like the 1890s, right?
1898.
1898, and then Three Men on a BUMMEL, which
1900.
is written. Yes. Okay. And so what little? Well, okay. I should explain why I chose this book, because my wife has a theory that I will only read or watch or listen to something after she has recommended it to me, but then a second person who is not her has also recommended it to me, usually a male. So,
okay.
And I will often come back to her and say, like, oh, you know, like my friend Tavis or my friend Clive recommended this. She's like, yeah, right. I told you to read that 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think my wife might agree with your wife that this is something that happens in our house as well. Yeah, is it latent sexism at work? I don't know.
I assume. But anyway, so I apologize to my wife because she recommended this book about a decade or longer ago, more like 15 years, when I was living in Japan.
So who was the second person who recommended it to you? You know, the one that matters, the male.
Well, no, the funny thing is, this came up just because we were thinking about books to read, and I was going through my mind about. So this is the first time, I believe, that it was not a second person. So I told my wife, oh, you should be proud of me because I'm going to read something you recommended without a man also recommending it to me.
And it was rubbish.
What a load of shite.
Don't trust those women.
But yeah, anyway, that's not
to be fair, Nick.
Yep.
They can review cookbooks and Marie Kondo. They know what they know about that stuff.
Sure, but not you know, the manly art of writing.
No, surely
a proper book with characters. So anyway, yes. So Jennifer recommended this to me some years ago. I didn't read it then, and then I don't think we'd done anything that was kind of in the comedy vein really yet.
I don't read many comedies, to be honest with you. So
right, yeah. I mean, they're something that has an appeal to, you know, a certain kind of reader, maybe, I guess, or you know.
I don't know if it might be one of the more rare of things is a good comedy novel that makes you laugh. I mean,
right.
Again, that could be just because I don't read many, so I haven't found many. But what I mean is, for me, I'm slightly more like if a book is described to me as a comedy, I'm slightly more trepidatious just because there's so many ways it can go wrong, or so many times someone's recommended something to me and I've read it and I'm like, no, yeah, this isn't really doing it for me. Do you know what I mean? And actually, case in point, we'll get to this with these two. I mean, even though parts of Three Men on a Boat and Three Men on the BUMMEL are funny, it's not necessarily the comedy alone that's getting me through these.
I would agree. And we'll definitely talk about that. So I think
as we're talking histories with
yes.
My history with this actually is I'd never read it before, but oddly enough, when I first met my wife, who's Japanese, so when I met her in London and she was studying English at a night school, Three Men on a Boat was their assigned reading.
Wow.
And I tried to look at it because I remember what the cover looks like. I tried to look it up to find out if they were reading an abridged version or not, because Three Men on a Boat, even though it's not a big book, it strikes me as an odd book to assign for someone trying to learn English in, 1998.
Yes.
And just in general, I don't know, it might be really great. Someone who knows more about linguistics or language, or it might be a really great choice, I don't know, but it strikes me as a slightly weird, and very much down to the personality of the teacher, or, something like that, who had decided, yes, we'll be doing 3 on a boat.
Right.
I don't know. And I remember I read, like when we first started dating, we would sometimes go back to my bedsit, hubba hubba, and read portions. I would read portions of 3 Men in a Boat to her.
Okay.
Because I remember not starting at the beginning or something, and I remember me reading a few chapters and then my wife finding it hilarious that I didn't realize that Montmorency was a dog.
Dog, yeah, yes. Although I didn't actually, funnily enough, in reading this for a while, I was thinking, oh, hang on. Okay, yes.
Right, yeah.
Now I get it.
They just introduce him as Montmorency.
As another character, yeah.
Yeah. Which is quite a nice little touch, actually. Because you're missing the original, because the original subtitle is To Say Nothing of the Dog, isn't it?
Of the dog.
But that's not on the cover. Frontispiece, but it's not.
So yeah, I think you kind of said, I think it has been used for a long time as a teaching tool for whatever reason, because when I was reading the Wikipedia entry about the book, they kind of mentioned how many languages it was translated into and how popular it's been across the world in various certain countries where for some reason it was just considered to be, and I wonder, because apparently in England it was kind of reviled. And it was reviled in part because it has a very conversational tone. It's actually quite easy to read. For a book written in 1896, it doesn't seem dated in the way that a lot of writing from that time.
It's as easy to read as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories from kind of the same time, right? There's no time has passed. Just a few things like Watson's constant ejaculating, for instance, makes you laugh.
Which is always a surprise.
But other than that, it reads fairly contemporary, right?
Yes, yeah. I mean, even some of the slang, I was kind of taken aback. I was like, I didn't realize that, that turn of phrase was that old. It really, and then not just, but the psychology of the characters is also drawn in a way that still seems very fresh to me.
Right.
I was surprised that there's one of my favorite moments in the first book. I don't know if there's not exactly a plot. Neither of these books exactly have a plot. They're both basically kind of travelogues. Right. The first book, 3 on a Boat, is a travelogue of the narrator, or who is basically Jerome K. Jerome, I guess.
Yes, and his friends are the 2 friends.
So they are real people, I guess.
Apparently events that had happened to them mixed together, heightened also things that have happened to other people, and more or less stuff taken from life, I think.
And so they basically travel up or down the Thames, up the Thames.
Up, I think. Is it they're going against the tide, right? I think.
Okay. In a boat, and basically that's kind of.
And it's 3 of them.
That's pretty much. But I mean, obviously the humor in the story is the constant digressions, the constant storytelling, Right. But one of my favorite scenes in the story is when. I mean, well, first at the beginning, they all kind of describe how they're 3 indolent, lazy guys. At least one, maybe 2 of whom are possibly hypochondriacs. Certainly are.
Yeah, and they're upper middle class, right? They don't really have too much they have to do, and and I think really key to the success of both books as well is that even though we have our main narrator, but everyone has they're all. And I couldn't keep them apart sometimes, to be honest with you. They all kind of seem the same variation on some kind of upper middle class, silly ass kind of, dapper but brainless kind of buffoon toff. But what's good is they're very obviously Jerome is very self-aware, but
Mhm.
his characters are not, right? Like they will
Yes.
contradict themselves
Oh yes,
within.
constantly. Yes.
And it's interesting. Sometimes it's very on the. It's like, oh, okay, I see. This is what passes for satire 100 years ago, but it's not. It's not gratingly so. I think.
No.
Even when it's seems sometimes primitive in that way, it kind of gets away with it as well, right?
Yeah, because I think that kind of flip-flopping and inconstancy in our own minds, that we see things one way when they're happening to us and another way when they're happening to somebody else. It's comedy when it happens to you, it's tragedy when it happens to me.
Right.
That kind of thing remains a part of human nature. But so to that sort of end, there's a part where Jerome K. is reminiscing about a time that he came upon a graveyard. And he kind of, earlier on, because he's a hypochondriac, he kind of gets into how he doesn't really like tombs and graveyards because they're a bit too much of a reminder of his own mortality. But in any case, he finds this one and he's standing there and he's having this whole kind of thought process where he's thinking about all of his family, and he suddenly becomes very magnanimous and starts to forgive them all for all of the crappy things they've done to him in his life. And then he wishes they could see him somehow forgiving them so they would understand what a truly deep and thoughtful and caring person he is. And then this kind of gammy-legged, groundskeeper kind of like hobbles up with a key to be like, "Oh, sir, you want to see the tombs?" And he becomes enraged and he's like, "I will fucking murder you if you don't back off," like, like because he's come and interrupted this moment of grand magnanimity. That was one of those moments where I did laugh out loud.
There are very funny bits. More so, I would say, for me at least, in the second book. But we'll deal with this first one. Yeah. So, like you said, it is just a series of vignettes as they travel upriver. And so, from what I understand from the introduction to the version I read as well, I think it started life as pretty much non-comedic. I think Jerome K.
Yes, as a travelogue.
Yeah, he did want to write about what was then this craze of boating on the Thames, right? Apparently, the Thames, because I suppose at that point as well, the Thames hadn't necessarily been that long a clean river that you could boat on, right? Like prior to that, it would have been an open sewer, right? Until as they explain in the, I forget the man's name, I should probably remember it, but some guy went out of his way, primarily apparently after Prince Albert died from like catching something from the drain from the palace or something.
Right.
And they were like, yeah, we need to sort this out.
Sewage system is not working.
Yeah, so then the Thames opened up as this kind of, we can actually put a boat on that. It's not just floating on turds and dead bodies. So yeah, it was a craze, and Jerome K. was a keen boater, and he decided, why don't I, write about it, and but yeah, apparently the comedy just got larger and larger and larger, and his publisher was just like, yeah, this comedy stuff is much better than the travel stuff. And it just
and a bit of a potted history as well of the various places that they visit.
Yeah, well, it's interesting the way I found it getting towards the end. It seemed to go more towards the initial travelogue kind of ideal towards the end of the book. Like, it's a bit front-loaded with comedy.
Yes,
I thought, and towards the end, it's not exactly pathos, but it's a bit more like there's something kind of slightly more melancholy, whereas the earlier stuff is a lot more like
when the dead woman floats.
Yeah,
dead floats by who has committed suicide because of being jilted in love or something. Yeah, that it's a sudden kind of a weird.
Yeah, whereas earlier in the book there's a lot of boing and people falling into rivers and that kind of slapstick kind of shenanigans, which I'm glad there's not too much of that. Like, yeah. So it's a weird. It's actually quite a strange. It's the kind of book actually I can imagine that very kind of learned, studious people who seriously take the craft of writing seriously and like how things should be constructed, I can imagine they would have taken against this book, because what is this? It's a part travelogue, part comedy, and it's totally rambling. but it's kind of fun to read, and it's not too long either, right? So
no, it's a good brisk read. But you know, Jen did mention, and I haven't read much of him or really at all, but Jen has, and my mum has read Bill Bryson, and they said that in many ways it seems like Bill Bryson 100 years before.
That's true, actually. I've read a few Bill Bryson books, and yes, I wouldn't have made the connection, but yes, that kind of
mixture of humor and also the will to impart some knowledge, whether it be historical or scientific,
yes,
or
mixed
whatever,
with observations on human, human foibles and stuff like that. Yes, actually, that's a good call on both your wife and your mother's. Mind you, it would be a bit better if it was backed up by a man.
Yeah, that's true. Yes, preferably with a pipe and a tweed jacket.
A very open-minded fellow.
I will say another favorite section of mine is it's this first book that has the whole thing about cheese, about the particularly stinky cheese that he's asked to bring back on a train, and it's sort of
right. That's one of the it's I would say 95% of it is kind of rooted in reality, and then there are these occasional flights of fancy, right? Because doesn't he end up like throwing the cheese in the river, and then like
by the end
go in the river stuff, like towards the end it gets quite, it turns into like it's the Blob or something.
Yes, but the funny thing is though, it put me in mind of and you may already know the story, I probably told you, or you may have read it before because I've written it down before. But that first day at McDonald's when I was 15,
right,
and I was made to shovel out basically a little concrete cell full of melted hamburger detritus for like 6 hours in the blazing sun, and it was just gray slime and it stank abominably. But when I came out of there and my pants had been basically coated in this muck, I got onto the city bus to go home, and I smelled like an open sewer. And immediately at the next stop, people got off the bus, like it emptied except for the driver. And then whenever we would stop to pick somebody up, they would step into the bus and step back off again. Wow. And my mom had to make me strip off at home and spray me with like a hose in the back garden. So reading that, I was like, oh yeah, no, I've lived this experience of.
It's interesting
because the center of a stench.
Because I know you, and I know that happened to you. That is one of those things that if I had read that, I would assume that would have been like either made up,
right,
or exaggerated. But no, that is actually
that happened.
Is true.
Yes. So reading things like that, there was a few moments where I was able to make that bridge of being like, I could give him the benefit of the doubt because stupider things have happened to me or friends of mine.
Right.
There was a guy, I may have told you this before, who worked for Shane, the English conversation school I worked for in Japan. And he was on the train and wedged his hands through the hoops, like the train hoops, right? In such a way, and he was a huge, gangly freak of a guy that he couldn't get them out again. Oh. And he was on the Yamanote line, so he was just doing circles.
Wow.
With his hands above his head, turning purple.
And his skeleton still rides the Yamanote line to this day.
Exactly.
It's the carriage that no one gets on. Just this rattling skeleton.
Angry Englishman.
With a grimace on its skull.
But that actually happened. I mean, the stuff used to happen to people who worked for Shane in Japan all the time that you would think that could never happen to anybody, ever. And then there was a guy who lost a finger while trying to climb into the dolphin enclosure down near somewhere near Kamakura. I can't remember where, but there's somewhere where there is, I guess, a dolphin that he scaled the fence and then was shouted at and fell off and tore a piece of his finger off and ended up in the Koban, and they had to come down and basically our managers had to go down and get him out of there. Wow. Obviously he was drunk out of his mind, decided it would be a good idea to swim with a dolphin.
Right.
Anyway.
So Three Men in a Boat is the other thing as well that because I was kind of, especially I'm glad we decided to read both of these, because I think if I'd have just read Three Men in a Boat, I'm not sure if I would have ever got round to reading Three Men on a Boat. Plus, well, reading them both next to each other really endeared me to these characters, and I was thinking, oh, I'd quite like some more.
Yes.
Three men, like some modern ones, like Three Men in Silicon Valley, or
yeah, absolutely.
That kind of thing.
Yes.
So I'm glad. Plus, as well, as a pair, I think they're good. But individually, I'm not sure. Like, I'm quite surprised. I can see why Three Men in a Boat was a hit in its day, but I'm surprised it's not one of those books that, you know, like one of those forgotten hits. You know what I mean? Like there's so many of those books which were hits around the turn of the century, and of course we remember this, and we remember, you know, the Sherlock Holmes stories and stuff like that. But there are so many that would have been household names that people are like, what? Who? Like, you've never heard.
Yeah. There's so many authors that were the Stephen Kings of their day or whatever, like that were everywhere.
Right, and
their work is forgotten.
I'm quite surprised that this has survived in a way, just because I wonder what it is. Because even though I had fun with it, I do question its longevity to a little. Like, what do you think? Are you surprised by it, or are you not surprised by it? Or
I think I'm not. I mean, I think if I hadn't enjoyed it, I would be surprised. But I did. Like, I found it very readable. I found it very funny, and there was constantly moments where I was surprised by how predictive it could be. Like, there's a whole section about like antiques where he talks about, you know, what will the antiques of the future be, and he's describing exactly what they are. You know, like,
for some reason it made me think of The Man in the High Castle as well.
Yes, exactly. You know.
Oh, you had the same thought.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and it was just I mean, I just
like how detritus becomes treasure.
Respectability. Right? Yeah.
All
and
the
like
crap that we hated in the 80s the first time round that is now cult. Or desirable exactly. In some way.
So yeah, no, it's but what's interesting to me is, in a way, I think I might have enjoyed the second book more.
Yes, me too.
Which I wasn't expecting. No, because it's the one that's less known and less loved.
Shall we move on to it?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
All right. So Three Men on a Bummel. A bummel being, well, I'll actually read it. I think it's worth reading, because I'm going to use this word in the future. Just to prompt people to say what, and then to me to explain what it is.
Perfect.
So this is actually, I don't know if this counts as a spoiler, because it is the very last paragraph of the book. So
when he finally explains what the title is,
yeah. So a bummel, I explained, I should describe as a journey, long or short, without an end. The only thing regulating it being the necessity of getting back within a given time to the point from which one started. Sometimes it is through busy streets, and sometimes through the fields and lanes. Sometimes we can be spared for a few hours, and sometimes for a few days. But long or short, but here or there, our thoughts are ever on the running of the sand. We nod and smile to many as we pass. With some we stop and talk a while, and with a few we walk a little way. We have been much interested and often a little tired, but on the whole, we have had a pleasant time and are sorry when 'tis over. So that's a bummel.
I'm just going to tell my machine to be quiet. Alexa, off. He didn't see that coming. He didn't see that we would have robots in our houses. That was,
you obviously don't have the unabridged version.
Apparently not. Beware the robot uprising.
Yeah.
But
confound me, Alexa, why don't you be quiet?
There's a part that whole idea of the bummel reminded me of, you may remember, when we talked about the whole situationist thing over at Film Crack.
Oh,
those, yeah. So you know, they had that idea too of, like, you go, although it didn't necessarily say, but you would assume it would be done within one day. You just go wandering in the city,
right.
You know, and then see who you meet and see what experiences you have.
And
without a destination in mind. Yeah, without a destination. Yeah, so it made me think of that. But what's interesting about this one is, of course, it's about a bike trip, first of all, to Germany.
Right.
Which affords us, I think, more, there's a lot more kind of pontificating. There's a lot more kind of discussing of national character, English versus German, and
we should mention as well, before we get into that, because I think there's a lot to get into there as well, is just to paint the picture that they don't go on 3 separate bikes for some reason, which is still kind of beyond me. One of them rides a sole bicycle, and then the other 2 are on a tandem.
Yes.
Which
is
you
awesome.
know is just not. I have never ridden a tandem bicycle in my life.
Nope.
I have never ever once considered this being a good idea. Like, what is the fucking use of a tandem? I mean, if you ride a tandem and you want to write in and let us know, please do so. I would be. I have never. Have you ever, Nick, thought, I love that cycling, but if only I could be attached to some other fool
who might tip us over.
Yeah, it's like, why would you ride a tandem bike? I don't understand. I mean,
no,
I see more value in a penny farthing than a tandem. Like, that makes more sense. Something that you can break your neck on makes more sense to me, because at least this looks cool. Imagine on a penny farthing, people would come from miles around. There's a guy on a penny farthing. But a tandem, it's a madness.
Yeah. I don't think I've even, like, I'm trying to remember if I've ever even seen somebody using one, let alone ridden one myself. And I think I would have seen one, like, my head.
Back in the day, like when I was a kid or something, there might have been something like some kind of fun race through the charity or something.
The circus was in town. Ringling Brothers
up with their tandem, and look at me, I'm like, and you just thought twat or twats as they went.
So yeah, you're right. They go on this. They decide to go on this bike trip, and there's a whole opening part where they make excuses to their wives, which is very well done. Yeah.
It rings true as well.
Yes.
Like the whole thing when the 2 of them, because the one of them is still a bachelor, and he comes back and essentially kind of asks, did you get permission from your wives? And they're immediately, we don't need permission from the wife, and neither will we take a reading recommendation without another man recommending
it. So there's that whole part, and then there's a part about saddles, which I thought was amazing. The part about, like, he describes and what you see them now, ergonomic saddles, right? Right. But about how this time, basically, it looks like a kind of splayed set of kidneys or whatever, and there's a kind of a gap in the middle of it. And then he just in the story he describes having tried to ride it, and it just.
Well, it's interesting, the whole thing in there as well that he says, which I think kind of may ring true forever, is that thing about like can't you take the rough with the smooth? Like, can't you just put up with a certain amount of discomfort? It's kind of part of the fun of it, or
until they make it a saddle made of clouds and rainbows or whatever, you're gonna have to just deal with a certain amount of.
But it's true, it rings. This day it drives me mad sometimes, like the level that we've got to now, where people like demand a certain level of comfort or entitlement, and you're like, is it really that hard to just do this? Like, to the point where people won't type things on their phone anymore, that because it's too much hard work, they have to
voice to text.
It's like old man complains.
It's perfect for this book, because that's what it kind of is. Another part I quite liked early on in the book, he says, there will be no scenery in this book, because reading descriptions of scenery is the most and it's true. I've always tuned out when somebody starts giving me 2 or 3 pages of describing the color of the trees and the, Well,
I find, as he points out, it doesn't work either. Like if someone goes into too much detail about, I can't actually, I automatically picture something when someone says, and it might be wrong, but it doesn't matter.
Yes.
And then when they actually try and specifics about something is adjacent to this, my brain gives up and I just resort to what I want it to look like anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
But you know that, and more than that, he goes into explaining how once upon a time it might have been worthwhile, but now we have
yes,
and photographs, and you know,
and again, in a way, prefiguring the internet too, right? You know, like back then, obviously, it would have just been photographs, but now, yeah, we have access to the whole world. So yeah, I could just look up what the Pyrenees Mountains look like.
Right.
So spend 7 paragraphs describing them to me because I'm not going to read them.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, they go and much like the first book in a way, and he doesn't. What I like about it as well is he doesn't go out of his way, like, either to explain that these characters they're older but not necessarily wiser, but also he doesn't seem to have gone out of his way either way to belabor the point. It seems as if, again, maybe because it's drawn from maybe something that did happen, these characters naturally feel like the same characters a few years later, don't they? Like,
yes,
like they haven't.
But they are his friends, I suppose, in real life. So he is just drawing them as they are.
Too much, you know.
No.
Like, but they're not quite. There's something slightly more world weary and less buffoonish about them in a way. Like they're slightly more aware of their own kind of hopelessness, and
yes,
I quite appreciate it. That whole thing. Is it Dylan Moran has that whole routine about, you know, never take a look at your
untapped potential.
Yeah, because there'll be less there than you think. It's like looking at your bank balance, right? There's always less than you think.
Yes. He describes it being like a filthy old man in a bedsit in a kind of a string vest that's yellowed.
Yeah.
Coughing out with a fag hanging out of his mouth. Like,
and God
that's your unfulfilled potential.
As much as I don't want it to be true, I think it is, like, especially now in my mid-40s, because I think mid-40s might be the stretch where it really comes into play, right? Where you start removing things from the bucket list that are least likely. Right. Like I'm not gonna have a second career as someone who sails around the world while simultaneously discovering a new element.
Yes.
This is probably what I do more or less now for the rest of my life.
There's a couple of threads that come through. Education is a thread that comes through in this book way more. And I know that apparently Jerome K. did have some experience as a teacher, but as somebody who has taught language, you know, like there's several passages that really jumped out at me as being just amazingly to the point, terrifyingly to the point descriptions of you know, a gaijin English teacher's job in Japan, for example, as a trained monkey there to, you know, amuse rather than educate, right? There's a whole part where he talks about French teachers in England basically being like they're a show, you know, like there's no actual educating going on. None of these children are actually learning to be functional in French, you know, even though they have a native speaker there. And I was like, wow, this is written when? You know, like this was my job for a decade. Yeah, and I was aware, and as we all were aware, that was, we were not in the education business, we were in the edutainment business. Right.
Adjacent to that as well is the whole stuff, and another stuff I thought was like, wow, this is Jerome K. Jerome's a real kind of observationist, is when he's talking about there's a character who's fluent in French and German.
Right.
When he speaks French and German, no one understands a word.
That's what he's saying, yeah.
And that's the amount of times where I have approached someone Japanese in Japan and said something in my, you know, I may not be the best Japanese speaker in the world, but there's, you know, I have a certain level I know I'm fairly comfortable with, and I know what I've just said was, you know, is the right words in the right order, and the pronunciation was good. If not, you know, sounded like a native just for that one sentence at least. And the person looking at you just looks like a deer in the headlights, dumbfounded, because they've braced themselves for hearing something that other than Japanese from your mouth, right?
Right.
It's gone into brace,
Fight or flight.
and then some Japanese has come out, and they can't. It's like, what now?
They can't process it.
can't. No, they're like, and then they respond to you, very good, thank you. And you're like, why are you talking to me in broken? I just said something to you in perfectly good Japanese, and it's just the weird disconnect between what they're expecting to come out from your pale white face and what you actually said. So that's, again, that whole stuff rang very true to me.
Yes, yeah. No, it's yeah. And then there's a part that I loved as well, where he describes being in school and this teacher like laboring this piece of, like, it was a piece of writing about a forest, and he keeps asking the kids questions on what else was there and what also was there. And
Right.
and I totally put me back to being in elementary school in Ireland and having these old kind of semi, senile kind of teachers who would waste half an hour on that kind of, like,
Right.
yeah, please,
Right.
sir, there was a bird. Yes, a bird. And what else was there? Like,
Yes. A tree, sir. Yes, very good, very good. Whereas, the very first kid pretty much got, it's just a forest. What do you
forest.
expect?
It's a regular forest. Yeah. Anyway.
So, and then, so as you mentioned earlier, so in the kind of the last, I don't know, it feels as if it must be the last 25, 30 pages of the book. You've had it peppered throughout, stuff about, like, Germans and German way of doing things, and it's all quite amusing and seeded throughout. But in that last it really goes for it. It really decides, okay, I'm gonna go now for a bit of a. It's interesting. It's not a character assassination or whatever you'd call a nation assassination or whatever. It's not that, because he's careful to say, no, I love the German people. The German people are very, very kind and all this and stuff. So it's not a full-on criticism, but he feels almost as if he can't stop himself. Like, he goes into this whole thing about how there's a specific, I should have marked it, but there's a specific sentence about the German can tell someone else to do, tell someone else what to do, and they can be told what to do, but they can't think for themselves what to do. Yes.
That's, I mean, this thread kind of goes, you're right, it goes through the whole book, and it becomes very dark near the end, and it
suddenly gets very serious, right? Like, it stops being funny after a while.
Yes, and very prescient in many ways about things. That whole thing of not being able to necessarily think for yourself and having a tendency to kowtow to order in a way that, in an unthinking kind of a way, like if a sign is put up.
But it's prescience in hindsight, which is always slightly problematic.
Right.
Like,
yes. But we do know how it all worked out, and it didn't work out well. And he specifically said at one point, the German people are as good as, and they will continue to be good unless they get a terrible government, a terrible leader.
Right.
He says it directly, because of their tendency to just go with whatever they're told is the right thing to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I was thinking about, and in the introduction as well, it mentions, it kind of makes a point of kind of putting it together with some other books from around the same time. The Battle of Dorking, which I've never read, but apparently there's a book by someone called I.F. Clarke called This is Prophesizing War, which actually sounds quite interesting. And it's basically someone wrote this book which listed all of these, I think mostly English books that were written towards the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, that seemed to very much point towards the coming conflict in Europe. The one I was familiar with was The Riddle of the Sands, which I don't know if you've ever read, by Erskine Childers. Fascinating character who ended up gun running for the IRA actually at one point, one of the chapters of his life, and he was shot. He was assassinated by the Free Republic Army as well, I think.
Wow.
And his Riddle of the Sands it's a great noise. It's about this guy who goes kind of yachting up, what's it called? There's a name for it, like, is it the Frisians, like along up beyond the North Sea, like along the coast of like Denmark and like that kind of body of kind of shallow water. And so it's a really good, again, a bit of a travelogue, but it's also an espionage thriller. Where basically he discovers that the Germans are planning to attack, Britain on its least defended border. And again, kind of very mixture of paranoid and prescient, I guess. There was a film version, actually, which from the late 70s, which reteamed, what's his name, Michael York and Jenny Agutter from Logan's Run together. It's not a bad film adaptation. And the one thing I really liked about it is one of the Nazis in it is played by, I forget his name, Mike, the guy who played Mr. Bronson on Grange Hill, who seems to have had a small career playing, he played Hitler a few times and Nazis in general. So he was a go-to Nazi stroke headmaster.
Well, there you go. I can see, I can see the overlap. That's a Venn diagram, you can imagine.
Right.
But the other thing that struck me was and it's funny, again, if you've like lived in Japan, there's this kind of this part where he seems to be complaining about the German wish to impose order on nature, right? That they are walling in their rivers, and that there's a park bench every 20 feet, and that you go to the top of a mountain and there's a restaurant there, that serves cold beer. And
I like
and anyone who is
like not people and dogs aren't allowed on the grass. Like a German dog is expected to read the signs. No dogs allowed. And there's like a park keeper who like picks up a beetle from the grass and puts it on the gravel and makes sure it doesn't go back on the grass. All that stuff's very, very, very funny.
But as I said, to somebody who's lived in Japan, it seems also to me, I was like, well, I didn't see a problem with it. I was like, of course you want a restaurant at that. It frustrates me greatly that here in Canada, when I climb a mountain, there's no restaurant at the top. There's no vending machine, where I can get a drink. That there aren't park benches, that everything isn't organized and controlled, and I don't have a problem with it,
Right.
But that's
it's that romantic thing, isn't it? It's that romantic nature which quickly runs away from you when you actually end up in a place that doesn't have.
That's wild. That's true. I mean, and the joke is obviously in the book that they're complaining the whole time till they get to the top of a mountain that suddenly doesn't actually have a restaurant at the top. And then
there's a damn restaurant because it's gone to the store. No, that bit's very funny. It's the other thing it reminded me of, oddly enough, and this is not actually something I like, but I can, because I don't think it was very good, but I can see the appeal of it if it was done well. Was Last of the Summer Wine, right? Like that.
Yes.
When they get up to the mountain, there's no rest of this, and then let's look for it. Let's see if we can find it. Like that whole kind of three men with nothing better to do and create ridiculous missions for themselves. End up going down a hill on a bathtub on wheels and disturbing Nora Batty's picnic. It had that kind of feel to it a bit as well, except actually funny and not something that also annoyed my Sunday night during my entire childhood.
I think it's just that piece of I did feel like I was learning as well. I felt like I was getting a sense of Germany at that time, which was nice. But then what was really interesting was that very grisly turn the book takes quite near the end of describing the duels, right?
Yes.
may remember comes up in Flashman.
Flashman, yeah,
as well, which we read a while ago, and it's exactly the same thing, right? But he describes it like whole chunks of people's faces just sheared off at the cheek, exposing their teeth. Like it's very, and then and how ridiculous it all is, because it's this controlled violence.
It's darkly comic, but also it almost seems like he's like, this is a public service announcement, kind of, stop doing this.
It seems angry.
It
seems angry. That chunk of the book, I was like, wow. And again, it kind of pokes at this idea of like there is a darker undercurrent to the German character that that is there,
And like you said, nowadays it feels almost safe to read it with the passage of time, because it does seem almost problematic in a way, like, okay, you've gone a bit too far now, like you didn't reel yourself in. This seems a bit I don't know what the word is exactly, but it's got this kind of slightly hankering tone to it. But again, because it's mixed in with things that, like we said, prescience in hindsight seem profound, so it's problematic because you can't ignore it. Like
because it might just seem chauvinistic and
exactly.
Like the Englishman goes to Germany and tells them how they should live.
But then again, at the same time, I can see what So having 100 years between, or over 100 years, makes it slightly more comfortable, because you feel more like, phew, I don't have to deal with this, or I don't have to justify me kind of enjoying it because it's of its time, and we can just say that. And but it's true though that it is that mixture of and because all the other observational stuff is so on point as well, it leads you to believe that this stuff is probably trustable as well. But it's the whole thing. It's the whole problem with stereotypes. Like, oh, that's such a terrible stereotype. But stereotypes start for a reason.
Somewhere.
But overall, I'm going to give you the floor if you have any more to say. But overall, just for me, I would say I would highly recommend reading Three Men in a Boat and Three Men on the BUMMEL together. Get a collected edition. They're very easy to find. It's very cheap. It's not going to. And reading both of them together. And also this Penguins edition as well has some quite good footnotes as well. I learned quite a bit about Germany and Prague and Czechoslovakia and stuff, especially in the second book. But I highly recommend, and I really like the cover on this one as well. It really
is really nice.
Captures the
the essence.
You got the umbrella and the hat down here. That's a perfect encapsulation of this book, of these books, I think.
I guess apparently a lot of people continue to recreate the boat trip. Apparently it is still doable for the most part.
Right.
So that's something we could do.
That would suit us. We need a
you, me, and Darren.
Yes, when Darren comes over, there we go. Or Ron, if Darren's Ron would.
Three Men in a Boat.
One thing, I suppose, did you happen, because there's been a number of screen adaptations, did you watch the BBC version with Michael Palin, Tim Curry, and Stephen Moore?
No, but it's definitely something I would. But I wondered how well it would actually work. But I do obviously I love
quite well
because because obviously Tim Curry is great, and
well, they're all three of them are great, right?
And the other guy was the voice of Marvin the Paranoid Android.
Yes, and when you see him, you will automatically recognize him from any number of things. You'd have grown up watching him on British TV in various, bits and pieces. No, it's good. What I mean is, it's not mind-blowingly good. It's not like, dude, you got to see Three. But Stephen Frears has done and Tom Stoppard, who wrote it.
Oh yes, that's quite a power team.
Yeah, really. It's quite. Like I said, it's not mind-blowing, but they've done a good job of probably doing as good a screen version as you would get for the ages. I think they've kind of got the tone of it. They've encapsulated it. They've moved a few things around, but more or less, it's sometimes things that they have that value, whereas like you haven't reinvented the wheel, but you've just, you've taken something and you've adapted it, and good, there we go. It's, it's, there we go. You don't need to do any more. That's probably the Three Men on a Boat screen adaptation you need, I think.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. No, I will definitely give it a chance when I have a.
But they're still waiting for the film version of Three Men on the BUMMEL.
Yes. Yes. Although that would take a very grisly turn right near the end, when suddenly you're getting people's faces flayed off.
Right.
But yeah, no, I thought I was pleasantly surprised, because you never know, obviously, when you recommend, well, not recommend, but when we decide to do something, we don't know until we read it, right? That's part of the fun of this.
Especially when it's a woman who's
well, yeah, exactly. I mean, who knew what we were getting into here? It could have just been a series of knitting patterns for all we knew.
Yeah. Well done, you next wife. You've done well for a woman. Good on you. Yeah,
she won't be listening to this, I don't think.
Good, because otherwise a divorce could clearly be in the cards.
Yes, yes. I think this could be. I'm sure this could just be shown in a court of law, and no one would have any questions.
No further comments, Your Honor.
And then all they have to do is screen the Cutie Honey comics thing we just did after it, and that would be it.
Yeah.
So anyway, no, I recommend it to anyone who wants to read some comedy that has lasted the test of time. I mean, it made me laugh out loud more than once, and very few books do that written at any time in history, to be honest. Although I will say, jumping back to Cutie Honey, any scene of that little sketchy old dad naked falling against a window with his little package squashed and girls screaming made me laugh out loud.
We're easily pleased.
Evidently so.
So for more...
your mileage may vary.
For more condescending, latently sexist literary chat, join us next time. And next time, because we recorded things out of order, we actually know what's going on.
For once.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's going to be, well, actually, I'm not going to tell you.
Yes, yeah.
But it was chosen by a man. So that's the most important thing. So
yes.
Until next time, Clive Davis.
Take care.
Is that your name?
Yeah, it's going to be from now on.
Okay.
I'm just going to take care.
TC. Yes. Bye.